Our guest tonight is Bob Gemmill. His family has property on the west shore of Grand Lake. So as you go across the Rainbow Bridge, I'm sure most of you know where the Spider House is. So if you're going down with the Spider House on your right, straight to the lake, his is the property on the left. Oral Burtis had the one on the right, and his is on the left. And it's been in his family for so long, they actually had a hotel on that site around the turn of the last century in the late 1800s that was there for a long time, the Grand View Hotel. And he'll tell you it was started as the Garrison House. So here you go, Bob.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be here. And this actually has been an extraordinary experience for me because there's a lot about my family that I don't know. Because I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the Northeast. And we only visited Grand Lake occasionally. So there are probably people in the audience who know more about my ancestors than I do. And I would be delighted to pick your brains sometime. But anyway, you're kind of not here to hear me. You're here to hear about Louisa Jane Spurgeon Spray Adams, or Louisa Adams. So she was my...
Get closer to the mic.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Thank you. All right. She was my great-great-grandmother. She came to Grand Lake in 1880, and as Donna said, she ran, really she took the Garrison House and turned it into a hotel and renamed it the Grand View. So I'm going to tell you stories that I heard as a child, but of course I didn't live hardly any of these stories because we were in New York and New Hampshire. And unfortunately, my father, who lived the stories, he didn't like to talk very much. So to get a story out of him was really like pulling eye teeth. I mean, he was a tough nut to crack. All right. So before we go on, let me just say the slides are going to be deposited with the Historical Society. So if we don't get through all of them, no problem. You can look at them anytime you want. And I have a written, really sort of detailed written stuff for each of the stories. So if we don't get to all those, you can look at the text. And there's things that I've left out. So I will try to remember to mention some of the more important things.
Hold it a little closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so this is Louisa J. Adams. This picture is out of Mary Lyons Cairns' book. She lived to be 100, and this is classic father. This is my father. He saw the book and said, the J stands for Jane. And she didn't live to be 101, she lived to be 100. Let's get things straight here. In case you hadn't guessed, he was an engineer. So, Louisa Jane Adams was born Louisa Jane Spurgeon in 1840 in what is now West Virginia. It was Virginia when she was born. And she married a man from Germany named Francis Spray in 1858. So this Days of Winter actually works. And they had a daughter, Fanny Spray. Fanny Spray was my great-grandmother. So she was born in 1861. Unfortunately, 1861, or thereabouts, was when the Civil War started. And so Francis Spray, the husband, joined the Union Army in 1861. This is what broke up West Virginia and Virginia. Because when they lived there, it was Virginia. And then West Virginia said, we're not going to fight for slavery. And so they separated from Virginia.
Hold it a little closer.
I will try to remember that. Okay. So keep kicking me if I let it drop. Unfortunately, he developed tuberculosis and died 3 years later. So their marriage didn't last very long. So in 1870, Louisa went to Kansas to a place called, that was not what I intended. A place called Mulberry Creek, which is just west of Salina, Kansas, in a little town called Headville. And they homesteaded a farm there, and she moved there with her parents, John and Phoebe Spurgeon. So when she was near Salina, she met this guy, Alexander Adams, and she married him in 1874, and then they had a daughter, Jessie Love Adams, born in 1875. So Louisa Adams had two daughters, two half-daughters. The first one was my great-grandmother. The second one was born 14 years later. And I discovered during this exploration of my family that she actually had a family here in Grand Lake. And I didn't know anything about it at all. Of course, my father did, but did he tell me? No, of course not. All right. So life in Kansas was kind of hard, so in 1880 they decided they're going to go to Colorado. Colorado sounds nice. So they went on a cattle drive. They drove 500 head of cattle to Middle Park, except they went over Berthoud Pass, got stuck in a blizzard, and 400 head of cattle died. So when they got to Middle Park, they only had 100 head of cattle left. Now, let me just say that there is another, turns out, relative who wrote a very detailed treatise on her life that I discovered in the Historical Society website. So I would direct you to that. It's called Survivors. It's like 37 pages long. And I learned all kinds of stuff from that I had no idea about. I did not know that she had driven 500 head of cattle over a period of about 2 months, 350 miles across most of Kansas, and then up over Berthoud Pass. I mean, what kind of person does that? She was tough. She was one tough cookie. All right. So they acquired a 160-acre farm in the Grand Lake Meadowlands. So I'm saying here that they homesteaded it, but I don't actually know. I presume that was true. That was 1880. That meadowland is underneath Shadow Mountain Reservoir. So we know that there was a piece of property that she homesteaded that is underneath Shadow Mountain Reservoir, and one little corner of that property sticks out. It's right by the East Shore Trail. You know, where the East Shore Trail climbs up a hill and then it goes down and you cross the boundary into the park. And somewhere right after that, that's where the corner is. But the rest of it is underneath Shadow Mountain Reservoir. And it was all a meadowland, and they had a farm there. Okay. So in 1888, she buys the Garrison House. And this is a picture of the Garrison House. I don't know the date for this, but they rename it, they rename it the Grandview. I think the original Garrison House was probably one of these buildings, and they duplicated it and doubled the size of the place. The picture is too grainy to know who any of these people are, but I strongly suspect that's Louisa Adams, because she was short. And she's very well dressed, so she looks like a proprietress to me. All right, so this is the Grandview. She ran the hotel until 1901, so 1888 to 1901, and then it burned down. So a great tragedy. Nobody died, but she lost everything. So at that point, she came into town and leased the Kaufman House. So your museum was her hotel. And I know the Kaufman House has her hotel register, because I've seen it. It's dry up here. Okay. And I'm skipping over an awful lot here, but she died in 1940. But she lived from 1880 till 1940, approximately, in Grand Lake, winter and summer. So again, tough lady. Now, we have another picture of the Grandview House. Come on. All right, so she lived to be 100. Okay, so this gives you an idea of where it's located. So this is obviously Point Park here, and the inlet outlet, and I didn't know you needed Rainbow Bridge. Well, okay. Anyway, so this is Jericho Road, and then this is a dirt street that's actually a county road of some sort. What, 6953? Anyway, the Grandview was right here. That's the property that we have, and what's currently on it are 2 cabins, the main cabin and the guest cabin, and you can just barely see the gazebo. And this is our dock. So a close-up of that shows a little better. And I want to point out something. This business right here is the trail. So in my ancestors' time, this trail nearly circumnavigated the lake. I don't think it went all the way around, but it was possible to walk from their property to this place, to the main town of Grand Lake, on that trail. And over the years, properties changed hands, people put up fences, and my grandmother was incensed over that, and she refused to acknowledge the fences, and she just climbed over. So she was one tough lady, in a long line of tough ladies, I would say. But at any rate, my grandmother pledged to keep this path open to the public in perpetuity, and we have honored that, and we will continue to honor it. Okay, so here's another picture of the grand view, and I'm showing this because it shows the rock. So this thing here is the rock. Now, you all know that the level of water in Grand Lake is maintained by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that level is like right about here. So you don't see much of this, and you don't see half of the rock. Why is that rock important? Because back in the day, the first family that spent time at Grand Lake were the Proctors, and the children made a point of pointing out that there was a giant rock in front of the place that they were staying, which was probably the Garrison House, and they had many happy days playing on the rock. And so Mary Lyons Cairns felt obliged to put in a picture of the rock, and then said, things live longer than people. It always gets me to think about that because it's so true. So many generations of people that we don't even know have probably played on that rock. All the indigenous peoples, the Arapahoes and the Utes, for thousands and thousands of years, their kids probably played on that rock and fished on it. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, the Indians undoubtedly played on this rock and had a great time. The Proctor children played on this rock. My kids played on this rock. And I have no idea how many hundreds of other kids have played on that rock as they walk by on the path. So it kind of holds a very special place in my heart because it represents a kind of a continuum, something that will be there, I hope, forever, something that was deposited by the glacier 12,000 years ago. And it's kind of, to me, it's like a symbol of the lake. The lake has been here for a long time. Baldy has been here for a long time. But we're very ephemeral. So I just spend time thinking about that. And I like to sit on that rock. So here's the rock today. So yes, our dock comes off the edge of it. But there it is, and you can go back and forth with the pictures and see, yep, that's the rock, all right. Okay, so now I have to give you a little family history. So the green is what you should pay attention to. And the numbers represent the generations. So this is Louisa J. Adams. Let's see. So here is a picture from our family archive, as it were. This is Louisa J. Adams, and this was taken probably around 1904. This is her father, John Spurgeon, and he died in 1908. So this picture obviously was taken before 1908, but he was like 96 when he died. So he's probably 92 here. This is Fanny Spray. Well, her married name is Quincy. So that's Adams's first daughter. And then these are her children, Nina Quincy and Lulu Quincy. Okay, so this is a picture of Phoebe Spurgeon, with John Spurgeon's wife. And this is a picture of Frederick Hervey Quincy, who was my great-grandfather. He married Fanny Spray. So number one is Louisa. Generation two is Frederick Hervey Quincy and Fanny Spray Quincy. They have two daughters, Nina Quincy and Lulu Quincy, who are these two people. Nina was my grandmother, and she married Edwin Earl Gemmill, but that doesn't have a picture of him. It'll come up later. But this is a picture of Frederick Hervey Quincy when he's probably about 60, maybe. And this is Nina Quincy, and that's my father. So Nina Quincy had one son, and that was Frederick Quincy Gemmill. And he's probably maybe between 6 and 8 in that picture. And he's got his first fish. It's hard to see there. But it also illustrates the cabin that was built. When the Grandview Hotel burned down, the land was vacant for a few years. And then my great-grandfather, Quincy, bought the land from his mother-in-law and built these cabins. But at first, the porch was just a screened-in structure. And later on, they made it closed in with glass windows. Okay, so that's this part of the family. Then This is my immediate family. So this is Fred Quincy Gemmill, my father, the guy, same guy with the fish. And this is my mother, my brother Fred, who's 10 years older than I am, and moi. So 1965, I was 12 years old then, and maybe a little smirky. Now I have to tell you that I've left off 3 people in our family. You can see this little number here, that's how many children they had. So my parents had 5 children, but 3 of them died, and they died of cystic fibrosis. Sorry. So this is my sister Katie. The 2 brothers that died, they died before I was born, so I didn't know them, but I knew my sister real well. And she was very small, very sickly all the time, but smart as a tack. Smartest person I ever knew, actually. And this is not Grand Lake. This is a summer home that we had as a family in upstate New York on the shore of Lake Champlain. So my family was very lucky. We had a place in Grand Lake, which we never visited, almost never visited. And then we had this place on Lake Champlain, which we spent the whole summers at. So I really grew up in the Northeast, only hearing stories about Grand Lake. Okay, so my brother has 1 child, and I have 2, and now I have a grandchild. So I'm 5th generation, and my wife would be 5th generation. We now have 6 and 7 generations. So we're at 7 generations from Louisa Adams. And my goal in life has been to instill a love of Grand Lake to my kids, and I'll pass it on to my grandkid, so that they never sell the place. Okay. So stories about Louisa J. Adams. I already told you about the rocks. I'm not going to repeat that. So one of the issues that has come up is, how is it that grandfather Quincy, Frederick Quincy, got possession of this land? And it appears that it was sold to him by Louisa Adams. Why would she sell her property to her son-in-law? Well, we think, or at least it's the family lore, she was planning on divorcing her husband. And this would have been in the early 1900s, the 1900s, like 1904, 1905, something like that. And back in that time, women had very few rights. So the fear was that if she divorced her husband, Alex Adams, he would claim the property as his, and she would lose it. So she sold it to her son-in-law, and therefore it was never an issue. And he could afford it, because he was a banker. He founded a bank in Salina, Kansas. Okay, so one of the stories about her that my dad told me was that she mysteriously, so grandmother Adams lived in Grand Lake for 60 years. But every summer she would disappear for a few weeks, and nobody understood where she went, and she never got back. Now, forgive me, I have to go back a second. Yeah. Right. So what I've not told you about is the other half of the family, so I have to say something about that. So the green shows the inheritance of the Grand Lake property where the Grandview Hotel was. But Louisa Adams also had a second daughter with Alex Adams, and that was Jessie Love Adams. She never came up in our family stories. But reading The Survivors, I learned a lot about her, because The Survivors is written by this Marjorie Wagers Thatcher, who is like the great-granddaughter of Jessie Love Adams. So apparently, when she was a young lady, she fell in love with this local guy, Ben Mitchell. And they married, and they had 3 kids. But grandmother Adams, right here, did not approve of this marriage, and she disowned her daughter. And she said, if you marry this guy, you are not allowed back in my house. So, that's kind of opinionated. At any rate, so they had 3 children, Rennie, Aaron, Myrtle, Lucy, and John Alexander, and this is completely new to me. I had no idea. All I ever heard was that Jessie Love Adams ran off to Salt Lake City with a Mormon, and we knew nothing about that. Turns out she had a family here in Grand Lake, and she abandoned them. So we think that grandmother Adams made a trip to Salt Lake City every summer to visit her other daughter. She must have forgiven her at some point, and probably tried to keep it secret, because there could have been consequences if people back here found out that Jesse Love Adams actually was living in Salt Lake City. But that's as much we know about it. Grandmother Adams never talked about it, and so the knowledge died with her. All right, so she mysteriously disappeared every summer. Now, by selling her property to her son-in-law, she had a problem. She had to have a place to live. So she acquired another house, which used to stand just south of Oral Burtis' cabin, which is now a house built by the O'Donnells a few years ago. You can still see the foundation of her house, but when she died, the property was bought by the Harringtons, and they had the building raised, perhaps to improve their view of the lake, I don't know. But you can still see the foundation. It's a bunch of large boulders that are stuck into the hillside, just to the south of the O'Donnell's place. Okay, so the other thing that we know that Grandmother Adams did is she homesteaded around Grand Lake, and 3 parcels of land, one of which came to be known as Mosquito Ranch, which I'll tell you about. But first, this is what stands in the property now. This is our main cabin. We have another guest cabin over here to the left. And I was up here the other day and I took some pictures just to show the snow, but particularly to show these trees. This was 1 tree back in the day, in the 1800s. Now it's 5 trees and an old stump, which is probably the intermediate tree. I'm sure the stump from the original tree was long gone. But anyway, we're very fortunate to have had these trees survive the beetle kill, but they did. All right, so this is one of her homesteads. This is from Google Maps. This is the southwestern portion of Rocky Mountain National Park. So here's Shadow Mountain, here's the East Shore Trail. I guess it was 2 pieces of it. Anyway, so Ranger Creek goes through here, and I've always thought of this as Ranger Meadows. So somewhere in and around this circle is where she homesteaded. And there was actually a foundation in this little hillock of trees. Very small, but it's definitely there. And I don't know if the Park Service has ever excavated out there to see what kind of artifacts they could find. But if they haven't, they should. And I'm going to inquire this summer to find out. Okay, so that's one of the homesteads. It's now inside Rocky Mountain National Park. The second one, well, I've already mentioned the second one, which was the farm in the Meadowlands. And I don't know exactly where that was, except it's underneath the water, so we can't really go out there and see it. But Mosquito Ranch was somewhere near where this circle is. So this is the boundary of Rocky Mountain National Park. Here's the Comanche Visitor Center. And the Winding River Resort is in this general area. So I don't know exactly where Mosquito Ranch was, but it was 160 acres somewhere in here. The Quincy Ditch was a filing that they made at Hot Sulphur Springs to dig a ditch to carry water from the North Fork of the Colorado River to some place inside the ranch, probably water livestock or something. Now, my grandfather, my father's father, he hated the place, and he gave it the moniker Mosquito Ranch. So, it's kind of unfortunate, but this is what happened. It was owned by Fred Quincy, and he died in 1935. And when he died, this property passed to my father. But at the time, he was in Boston attending MIT for an engineering degree. And he looked at this and he said, oh man, Mosquito Ranch, I have to pay taxes on it. It's the Depression, I need the money. I'm never gonna get out there again. It's so far away, 2,000 miles, and we're talking 1935, so it wasn't like you could just hop on a jet and be here in 3 hours, right? So he sold it. And I can tell you that he kicked himself for the rest of his life for selling this property, to the day he died. And think about things before you do them really hard, because there was no going back on this one. And I have no idea where the Quincy Ditch actually was in this, but it might have been something like this. And Donna, you were telling me today that there is an Adams, or used to be an Adams gravel pit out there, which probably was named for Louisa J. Adams.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anybody is here from the Winding River Resort, I'd love to talk to them. Okay, so now we're going to turn to this ancestor, Fanny Spray Quincy. I don't know really anything about her, but I can tell you a couple of things. So this is the cabin as it stands last summer. As I said, the windows here, well, a lot of the red paint has fallen off, which I'm trying to fix, but before the windows were put in, it was a screened-in porch, and my father slept out on the porch as a boy. Well, at that time, this was before the Big Thompson project had been built, and so there was a farm in the Meadowland, and the cows would escape from the farm, and they would come up to our property, and so you see this red line here. That's sort of the approximate boundary of my great-grandmother's garden. So all of this land here was, I don't know, vegetables, flowers, whatever she liked to grow. I don't know what that was. The cows would come in here and devastate it. So my father's job was to wake up in the middle of the night when he heard the cows, get out his slingshot and pop them in the butt and scare the cows away. So that's almost the only story I know, but just recently I heard that they used to get together and go down to the meadowlands and pick something called meadow mushrooms. Anybody know what a meadow mushroom is? Never heard of it? I've never heard of it, and I don't know what they are. I would be very cautious about picking mushrooms and eating them. That could be dangerous. But anyway, so that's really all I know about her. The cows in her garden and picking meadow mushrooms. So now we're going to turn to her husband, Frederick Hervey Quincy. So this is Fred Quincy when he was about 20 years old. And I'm guessing this is when he was about 65. My kids said, oh, he looks like the penguin. Anyway, so he was born in 1857. His middle name is Hervey, not Harvey. And if you look him up on Wikipedia or whatever, they always misspell it as Harvey. Even in the obituaries and stuff in Kansas, they say Harvey. So he was a big man around Salina, Kansas. He founded a bank. He was a sheriff of Saline County, and he was a Kansas state senator. He's the one that bought the property from my great-great-grandmother and built the cabins, which he called Rainbow Lodge. And we still do. And we think that the cabins were built around 1915 because somewhere, and I haven't been able to find it, we have a picture of my father as a baby next to the carpenter putting the finishing touches on the cabin. And he was born in 1914. So the stories are going to be Grandfather Quincy's touring car, the legend of Grand Lake, picnics, and etc. Okay, so this is the other cabin. If you look at it, it's old, it's rustic, but there's something odd about it. It's got an extra piece of roof right here. So the Quincy family would pile into his touring car at the beginning of the summer, and this would be him and his wife and their 2 daughters and their daughters' husbands and their children. So there's a lot of people. And they would drive the 350 miles up to Grand Lake. It took them 3 days. Well, one year he had a new touring car, and he discovered, so this part of the cabin are garages. They're basically horse stalls and just dirt floors. But he pulled his touring car in here and it wouldn't fit. It's too big. So he hired a carpenter to extend the building. So we have a little bit of roof and a little bit of wall, and he just popped the thing out a couple of feet so that his touring car could go into the garage. Well, that's not the only time they did this. The other cabin has lots of evidence that the kitchen was popped out multiple times. It's a tiny, tiny kitchen, and anybody, Oral's been in there, and Donna's been in there. They know how cramped it is. But whenever they got a new piece of equipment, like a wood stove or something, they would pop out a wall and put it in. So it's a ticky-tack shack. Okay, let's see. Let me go back for a second. All right. My great-grandfather, this guy, was very taken with the legend of Grand Lake. And so he had pamphlets printed up that reprint the whole legend in this little thing that he must have given out to friends and family. We had a whole slug of these things, and they got lost. And today I found the stash. It's unbelievable. So I brought one, and it's on the back table over there. So you can look at it. It is a little damaged by water, so some of the pages are stuck together, but basically it's the whole thing. And you can, of course, you can read it in Mary Lyons Caron's books. But he was very much taken with this. And of course, he knew Judge Westcott quite well, I'm sure.
And that's his pipe set, right?
I'm getting to that.
Okay, all
I'm
right,
getting
good,
to
good.
that. Another thing, he was actually quite a large man. If you go back to this picture, you can see he was pretty large, and he liked his comforts, and he particularly liked the soak in hot springs. So he would gather the whole troop together, drive down to Hot Sulphur Springs, and go soak in the tubs and have a picnic. So that's what that is all about. I don't know anything more about it, although I do know we have a picture of them at Hot Sulphur Springs, and I'm having a hard time putting my fingers on that picture. At the end of the summer, the family would have a pinochle contest, and whoever won the pinochle contest would get to set the date for the return to Salina. And one year my father won, so he got to say what day they would come back. I have no idea what the other parameters were. So grandfather Quincy, in 1935, in July, he had a heart attack at Grand Lake, and they transported him to Denver, and he died on Bastille Day, which is July 14th. We have his pipe from the day he passed, and it's sitting back there on the table. So it's been on our mantelpiece since 1935. Okay, I already told that story. So now, we go to generation 3, 9 Quincy. So she's my grandmother, and she married this guy, Edwin Earl Gemmill. So this is E.E. Gemmill as a boy, and here he is as a young married guy. This is a picture of the happy couple. They lived in Boise, Idaho, and he was a dentist. Well, I don't think dentistry worked out for him, because within a year or two, they had moved back to Salina, and he started working for his father-in-law. He started working at the bank. They had one child, my father, Frederick Quincy Gemmill. They were the ones, or she was the one that picked meadow mushrooms with her mother, Fanny Spray Quincy. But she really loved to pick huckleberries and black currants on Shadow Mountain and anywhere they could get to. And she made jams and jellies with those berries. So she died in 1983, I believe. And after she passed, my father told me that he discovered her hoard of jams and jellies and proceeded to eat them. They were probably 50 or 60 years old at that time, and he didn't die from it. So, and he didn't share them either. He didn't tell me about it until after they were all gone. All right, so they did a lot of berry picking, a lot of jam making. But he did tell a story about one day a hunter came back from North Park with some sage grouse. And so he gave them a couple of sage grouse. And the salient point of this is they couldn't eat the sage grouse because they were so strongly flavored with sage. But if they soaked them in brine for something like 48 hours, it would soak out some of those aromatic oils and make it palatable. So that's what they had to do. The other really interesting thing about her is she made rugs. And she made, I'm calling them hooked rugs. I've got 4 examples here on the tables. I would really like to know what the craft actually is that made this, because I'm not sure I'm correct on the hooked rugs. But these are all made by my grandmother, by this lady here.
I think we should hold them up. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Do you want any particular order?
Nope.
Or shall I just
Just show them.
Okay, so first, this is the cabin. So she designed these.
She made the designs and did every little step of the way, every stitch.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And she would sit out underneath the gazebo roof, because that would protect her from rain, hail, and sun, and work on these rugs all summer long. And I think a lot of people that walk by would see her working on these rugs. I don't know how many she made. We only have 4, but I know that she made more than that. This one is very interesting because it's got a magpie and 4 cardinals. So magpie is Colorado, cardinals are Kansas in eastern US. So I don't know if this is magical thinking, or if it's a wish, or if it's like, okay, well, let's combine Salina and Grand Lake, and we'll give birds of both. I just don't know. And then there's 2 more in the back. One is the classic image of Baldy, and the other one is what I call the psychotic deer.
You're going to want to see the deer when we show Baldy first.
Yeah, so...
I'm coming up here so the camera.
All right. So this is totally cool because not only does she accurately portray the lake and the mountain, she put the footpath in this picture. The footpath is right along here, and she included the rock. So, and not only the rock, she included the tree. It's right just to the left of the rock. I mean, what kind of a person does that? I mean, that's just crazy. It's such attention to detail. I wish we had more of her stuff, but you know, we have what we have. And then the psychotic deer. You'll see what I mean when Donna holds this up. So when my kids saw these eyes, they said, "Oh, Dad, you can't put that on the wall. You have to hide that." So it's a deer that's either drunk too much coffee or maybe has a cocaine habit. I'm not sure. What's that? 8 meadow mushrooms. Yes, exactly.
This is what they look like on the back.
So the pattern really shows through on the back side as well, except there's a little bit of white that is the shall we say, the canvas that the hooked cloth is stuck through. So you can tell the front and the back that way.
And then the rug,
Well, yes, so I also brought a rug that's been passed down through the ages, which is it's a Navajo rug. We do not know the provenance of this rug. I presume it's been in the family for a long time, because, you know, it certainly was in a drawer. So my grandmother, when she arrived at the cabin in the beginning of the summer, she'd get this rug out and put it on the floor. People walked on this, and that's not right. It's like walking on the Mona Lisa.
and it's such great condition.
Well, I think we're very lucky. Or else she had a very light touch. Okay, so those are the hooked rugs. She spent every summer of her life at Grand Lake, sitting on the gazebo, certainly in her later years, sitting on the gazebo and hooking rugs. The first time I came to Grand Lake was in 1961. What happened? We lost the...
Oh, did you want to step on it?
I don't know. Computers. Oh, there it is. All right. And actually, the story I wanted to tell is when I came back 12 years later, so there's a 12-year gap, 1973, so I was 20 years old, and she would make a pot of oatmeal, a huge pot of oatmeal, every morning, and I started eating the whole thing. And she, boy, that boy has a real appetite. What's going on? Well, dinners were these tiny little things. She had no idea how much an almost teenager ate. And I was starved. And I told my parents, we got to go into a restaurant somewhere and get some food because she's killing me. And then I would eat the entire pot of oatmeal. Okay, and then the last thing I want to say is she was feisty. And she really kind of demanded that the trail that went across our property and over to the town be left open so people could walk on it. And as I said before, it got slowly closed off, and she resisted that. So, you know, we have pledged to keep it open, and we will. All right, so this is my grandmother at their 50th wedding anniversary with E.E. Gemmill. She was age 73 in 1963. And then this is a picture of her at age 89. She lived till 1983, so she lived to be 96 years old. And this is a person some people here may know, but I don't. Peg White Doe. And I guess they were probably pretty good friends.
Right.
I wish I knew more about her.
Yeah. So where the Baltz property is, Kickapoo Lodge, and then where their home is, that was Peg Doe's property. And whenever I first started in real estate at Jenny Dale's back in the early 80s, they did a real trade. So Peg Doe owned this property on Grand Lake, and Steve and Marty Baltz had a little vacation home in California, and they traded. And so Baltz, of course, still own it to this day, but the legal description is the Margaret White Doe Tracts. That's the actual name of the subdivision. So
So people do come and go, but the rock always stays. So here's the Lakeshore Path just a couple days ago. People are still using it, which I'm very pleased about. And our property used to have a fence around it that looked like this. That's the only piece of the fence that's left. One of my goals in life is to rebuild that fence. I haven't gotten around to it yet, so hopefully I will. But anyway, she was really, really adamant about that trail. And we really enjoy it when people walk along the trail and they stop and chit-chat with us, because we're often sitting out in the gazebo doing whatever we're doing. And we get to visit with people that knew my grandmother and knew her much better than I did. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. So this is going to be about my father, and I'm going to throw in a little bit about myself as well. So I'm Generation 5. So my father was born July 26, 1914 in Boise, Idaho. But shortly after that, maybe a year or two after that, they moved back to Salina. He went to the University of Kansas and then to MIT. And here I have to tell you a story. So one of the stories from my father has to do with the trip that they made from Salina to Grand Lake every summer in grandfather Quincy's touring car. So one day they were making this trip, and I don't know if they were in western Kansas or eastern Colorado, who knows. But a storm was brewing, and they decided to stop the touring car and get out and have some relaxation before the storm hit. Well, they stopped near a flat-topped butte, a mesa, and my dad got it in his head that he would climb to the top of that mesa. So he did. And when he got to the top, he pointed his finger into the sky, and sparks flew off his finger. And then he said, like 100 yards away, pooh, a bolt of lightning struck the mesa top. And he hightailed his rear end out of there as fast as he possibly could. But interestingly, we think that's probably why he studied electrical engineering at the University of Kansas and then got a master's at MIT in electrical engineering. So after this, MIT of course is in Boston, he basically settled in the New York area. He worked for a Sperry Gyroscope company. He designed and built bomb sites during World War II. But he had spent every summer at Grand Lake as a child and youth. So that's the lightning story. So the other hair-raising story. So you have to understand, if that lightning bolt had hit him, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But there's another story that's not dissimilar. Someone told him that he could go to a place on Specimen Mountain. You all know where Specimen Mountain is?
No.
You go up Trail Ridge Road, and somewhere up near the pass, there's a trail that goes off, but I think the Park Service has closed it off. You can't go there anymore. But back in the day, they didn't close anything off. There's a region of Specimen Mountain called the Crater, and he was told that he could find geodes if he went to a particular place. So he decided to do this. The particular way to get there was to shimmy along a very narrow ledge right at the edge of this crater with a steep drop off the other edge. And crazily enough, he did that, and he got to a point on the trail where the trail, or the ledge, kind of came out like a point and then angled back like this. So he had to reach around this ridge of rock, grab onto something, and swing his body around that and continue on to where the geodes were, which he did. Knowing him as an older man, I just would never picture him doing this, but he did it. He had a hammer, he collected some geodes, he threw them in his wicker basket backpack, and then he shimmied back. Well, on the return trip, he got to that spot, and he tried to reverse his steps, but he forgot that he had rocks in his backpack. So the backpack's weight and its momentum were completely changed. And when he made the swing, it threw him off balance and he stumbled, and he almost went in the drink. Well, down the cliff. So there's at least 2 incidents that should have killed him and didn't. So I'm kind of glad of that. Okay, so it turns out he was also a ham radio enthusiast with his dad. He used to string antennas up and down all the trees that were surrounding our cabin. Most of those trees have died, unfortunately, because of the beetle infestation. But we got a lot of trees that are coming up, so I'm really glad about that. Okay, I first visited Grand Lake in 1952, but I was born in 1953, so I was an embryo inside my mom when my family visited. But they did some interesting things, and I have pictures from that. I do remember my visit in 1961, which, let's see, I remember the July 4th parade. I remember hailstorms. We had a hailstorm that put about 3 inches of hail on the ground and made everything look like it was the middle of winter. I remember mosquitoes on some of the trails, thousands of mosquitoes. And I remember going to the dump at night with a car and looking at the bears rummaging through the trash, which obviously the kibosh has been put on that a long time ago, and good for them. Okay, so back to this visit in 1952. I have some pictures from that. So this is the famous bear trap at Lulu City. And so in 1952, it still stood there. This is my father, this is my mother, and that's my brother. So it's just the three of them. So my father and brother. And then they took a picnic at Bear Lake. So this is my grandfather, E.E. Gemmill, and Nina Quincy Gemmill, my father and my brother Fred. And he's communing with a squirrel. They don't allow that anymore either. Now, the highlight of the trip was, it was Regatta Week in 1952, and apparently, at that time, I don't know if they still do this, but they threw a bunch of watermelons into the lake, and then they said, okay, go find the watermelon, and if you do, you get a prize. So my dad found a watermelon, and he got second prize. So I guess that was the second watermelon. So very, very pleased with himself, because I don't think he ever did that when he was a kid. So 52, he would have been 38, 40, something like that. I don't know. All right, so this is my father in 1995 at age 81. So he loved the mountains. He loved He loved Grand Lake. He loved going hiking. So, you know, he would get out here every chance he had, and I would try to join him as many times as I could. So we went backpacking, something he couldn't do as a kid because there wasn't the equipment. We went horseback riding, and we just went walking. And so he just loved doing this kind of thing. And I frankly miss him. Oh no, go back. What? There we go. Okay, so this is my last slide. I have to read you something. So, the slides will be posted, as I said, on the historical site, as well as this document, where I've written out all these stories in some detail. Okay, here we go. So this is obviously sunset on Baldy, and we started this with sunrise over Baldy.
Oh, yeah.
So the sun sets every day. And if you are lucky, you can see it painting the top of Baldy with bright orange. The mountain, the lake, the rock seem immutable, but of course are not, while we seem as ephemeral as mayflies. The sun rising behind the Continental Divide every morning and firing up Baldy every evening reminds us of the circle of life, and reminds us to do good in this world, to try and protect the wild and natural places we so enjoy for future generations. And just maybe we can teach them to slow down a bit and enjoy these special places during their lives and protect this legacy for those who come after. And I would be more than happy to entertain any questions you have.
Meadow mushrooms are actually in Google specifically for Grand Lake.
Really?
They're an edible mushroom that you just have to be careful, but they do exist and they are real. But it actually specifies Grand Lake meadow mushrooms.
Wow.
No kidding.
No kidding.
Huh.
My mom and dad collected mushrooms my whole life.
Is that right?
Yeah, they knew which ones wouldn't kill you and which ones would.
Yeah, that can be tricky. Well, thank you for that. That's terrific information to have. We'll have to figure out what species of mushroom that actually is.
Oh, it tells you.
Okay, I'll look it up. Yeah.
Well, Mosquito Ranch, the map that you showed actually ended up being what we called in our family the little Harbison Meadow. Bernie and Rob Harbison bought that land, or got that land, because it was school set-aside land. And that was about 1947.
Okay.
So Mosquito Ranch would have been close to it, but not where you had the circle.
Yeah, I just plopped a circle
I don't
somewhere.
know where it was exactly, but that's the meadow that Tim and Mary Lou have now, that borders the park.
Okay, I believe the Park Service has a little like picnic area that's called the Harbison Meadow Picnic Area?
Yes, they do.
Just inside the park?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And it's not on the Harbison Ranch.
Yeah,
It overlooks the Harbison Ranch, but it's not on there.
right.
Do you know where the Quincy ditch was?
I don't know where the Quincy ditch was. There is a ditch across the meadow that the Harbisons had, but they dug that.
Yeah, so the Quincy Ditch, we don't know if it was planned and never built, or if it was planned and built, and it's like, I know nothing about this. But unfortunately, there's a lot of things that I know nothing about. I've learned so much from this exercise. It's been really extraordinary, and it also tells me how much more there is to learn. So, any other questions? Does anybody have any idea if these are really hooked rugs, or if they're some other type of crap? Yeah, in the back.
They are not hooked. They are made with a wooden device. It's called a latch hook. So it's like a shovel. I watched my grandmother and my mother use that rug latch.
Okay, so it's a latched rug.
It's latch hooking.
Latch hooking.
But it's not like a crochet hook. It's a
Okay.
wooden device that operates like a shovel. And it's handheld.
So that's interesting because our cabins have been around for 110 years, and they have nooks and crannies where things are stuffed. And I was looking for some of the artifacts that I knew we had today, and I came up with the pipe thing over here. And in the box that held my great-grandfather's pipe, there was a wooden stick with a hook on the end of it. And I looked at that and I thought, sounds exactly like what you're describing. I think I may have found my grandmother's latch hook for making these rugs. So,
Excellent.
okay. One more question in the back.
Your rug is called a Ganada, and it comes from only the Ganada trading area on the Navajo Reservation.
Okay, so that's terrific. Would that be ganado?
Not Granada like in Spain, but Ganado.
Yes, okay. So in Navajo, in the Navajo Nation, there's a town called Ganado, and it has a National Historic Site called the Hubble Trading Post.
Correct.
My mother was a Hubble, and it was a relative, very distant, that ran that trading post in the 1800s.
Lorenzo Hubble.
Well, Lorenzo Hubble, that's right. And my aunt and uncle became docents at the Hubble Trading Post because they were Hubbles. And I think the Park Service really enjoyed that because they had the same name as the person. But, you know, the relationship was far away. I mean, it was like, 10th cousin or something. But who cares? So that rug came from the Ganado Trading Post. That's kind of full circle, isn't it?
Take it to Antique Roadshow, you might not take it out of the house.
Well, okay, so I don't know if I said this, but my grandmother put that rug on the floor. People walked on it. And it's like, whoa, we would never think of doing that today. But if she couldn't use it, what was the point of having it? I think that was the attitude. So thank you for that. That's really terrific information. Well, you've been a wonderful audience, and I've enjoyed this immensely. And I think that I probably have more stories to tell, but I won't tell them now.